Geography Podcast by Peter Dubois. Corrasion is basically when water is hitting the cliff and knocking off small pieces. Attrition is when the cliff is getting hit by small fragments from the sea. And corrosion is when water is slowly dissolving a cliff by hitting the cliff real hard. And hydraulic pressure is when water is going through the cliff. First, you need the prevailing wind to push sand and water towards the headland. And when that happens, a little spit appears, and the river brings mud and more water behind the spit, and then a crack appears behind the spit. Then the spit gets bigger and eventually turns into land. Longshore drift is basically the way the water is heading because of the wind. Cliff erosion is when water is hitting the side of the cliff and the cliff begins to get smaller. And as you can see, there's a wave cut platform on the bottom, and I've labeled the wave attack zone where the waves usually hit. These are the shorelines. There's low tide, there's high tide, and there's offshore, which is like deeper in the water. This is the foreshore, and this is the backshore, which is more further on the beach, and the foreshore is the part that's going into the water. Tumblosis is basically longshore drift bringing sand all the way to another island. Caves, arches, and stacks. To form like a stack, it starts off with a little crack in the water in the cliff because all the water is hitting it, and eventually the water keeps hitting it and it turns into a cave, and then it keeps going and turns into an arch, and which goes right through the whole rock so you can see through, and then that arch will eventually collapse and just leave a stack, and then that will fall off and turn into a stump. Erosion, transportation, and deposition. Suspension is basically small fragments of sand, and solution is different types of liquids, and traction is big rocks that can be moved around, and saltation is just small things. For a coral reef to form, there needs to be certain conditions in the water. It has to be very light, like it has to be shallow, so the reef itself has enough light to form, and the water temperature needs to be warm, and there needs to be a river nearby bringing fresh water in all the time to keep the reef developing and fresh. A fringing reef is all the way on the left, and it's where there's a beach, and then it goes deep into the water and then comes back up. As you can see right here, it goes down, then comes back up, and this is the reef. A barrier reef is basically a reef parallel to the coastline, and an atoll reef is a reef that's in a circle. Some ways to prevent erosion is on the beach is you can add seawalls so the water doesn't come, groins so the water doesn't be as forceful as it can be, and barriers which can stop big waves coming from the ocean. Advantages and disadvantages of living in a coastal area. Some advantages are there's a nice sea breeze which has cool air and it feels good, and there's less pollution near the land, and there's a nice beach, and the weather is really nice and warm, or it can get sometimes cold because it's near the water. And some disadvantages of living in the coastal area is it's pretty humid, and there's always a chance of a tsunami if you're near like a big ocean, and there's always a chance of a storm, so your houses have to be pretty strong.